Hey guys, Adam here with Circadian Coffee. If you're watching this, it's probably because you got the Costa Rica sampler box. We just wanted to do a quick little presentation in order to tell you a little bit about the different coffees, processing styles that you're about to try. So, jumping in, we thought it'd be a good idea to run through really quickly how coffee goes from wherever it starts to your cup. So, first of all, coffee is grown. Uh, Only is grown between the republics of Capricorn and Cancer, although those are moving a little bit because of increased temperatures. It takes about 5 years for a coffee plant to fully mature and start producing fruits. And then we get a coffee cherry. That's the little guy right there with a smile on him. This little infograph here was developed by a guy named Dan Zatowicz. And honestly, it's one of the best things I found for the cycle of the coffee bean. So, coffee is unpicked usually by hand. The way coffee grows is the beans don't actually all develop at the exact same time. So, if you used a machine, then you would get a lot of underdeveloped, overdeveloped coffee beans. Whereas doing it by hand means you pick only the ripest cherries at a time. It then gets moved over into processing. There's usually pretty much all coffees in the world are dry processed or wet processed, and we're going to go into what those mean, but we actually have two other processes that we're going to talk about which kind of fall into these categories as well. So basically these are types of fermentation, and then they mill the coffee, which is basically just removing all of the pulp and the mucilage and all that good stuff, and producing a coffee bean, which is green. And how we buy it at Circadian. We buy ours through mostly importers. For once in a while, we do some deals with farmers directly, but we roast it in a drum, which is really just an extended special drying phase to get it to taste the way we want to, and then we ship it out to you guys and y'all drink it. So the different parts of a coffee cherry, there are four main parts that we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to get too into the weeds on the details on this, but basically there's the cherry itself. It's covered in a skin or pulp. There's mucilage inside, which is really like the tender part of a fruit. If you think of like an actual cherry, there's kind of the waxy exterior, and then there's the nice tender fruit part. And then there is a seed. In our case is the coffee bean. In the cherry's case is a pit. And that seed is covered in what's known as parchment or silver skin, which is basically just there to protect it as it develops and keep it from sprouting. So the pulp, the exterior, and the mucilage are really the two important things that you should know about, and we're going to talk about over the next couple minutes here. So the first coffee we're going to talk about is the Doka estate La Laurina. It's a wash process coffee from Costa Rica, as all these coffees are. The Doka estate is the farm that it was grown on. So whenever you see names like that, it's telling you where within that country the coffee was grown. In wash process, the beans are depulped, so that means the skin of the coffee is removed, but the mucilage is left there. And it's placed in these vats of water with the mucilage on it for 12 to 24 hours, depending on how hot it is. The hotter it is, the faster this fermentation happens, and they don't want it to get too funky or fermented because that's bad. The mucilage slowly breaks down. That's what happens as it ferments, and it allows the green coffee to absorb sugars. The beans are then taken to these drying patios or raised beds, which are just these stands that kind of expose the bean on all sides to the air, and they're allowed to dry for 10 to 22 days. They're trying to get the moisture content below 12%, shooting for about 11%, because that keeps any bacteria from being able to thrive in the bean itself. So the slower this drying process is, the better the coffee usually is. Within reason, I can't imagine that you're going to taste much of a difference between a 15-day dry and a 16-day dry, but you would taste a pretty big difference between something that gets dried in 10 days versus something that's dried in 22 days. So it's It's all about scale. Wash process beans are usually sweeter. They take on sort of a fermentation kind of characteristic. It's generally described as sort of funky, but it's not like kombucha funky, if that makes sense. Most coffees that you've probably drank in the world, you definitely try to wash process, is what I'm saying. And never thought it tasted too funky. So don't be too weirded out by that word. But if the beans do take too long in the fermentation tanks, then it can result in a vinegar-like note in the end product. So that would be something that they would catch somewhere along the way, and it wouldn't get sold as specialty coffee. The next one is a natural process. This is a fancy San Diego Tarrazu. Fancy refers to the size of the coffee beans. So when coffee beans get hulled or milled, they also get sorted by size. This helps provide us with some consistency. There's also some grading. You want kind of smaller beans because those beans are going to be a bit more flavorful for our purposes. So that's part of the reason why, and fancy is one of those terms that refers to size. In Ethiopian coffees, you'll typically see like AA coffees. All just size references that don't mean a ton to the end consumer unless you're really nerdy and into those things, in which case, good for you. So in a natural process, the coffee cherries are placed on raised beds or drying patios again. In this picture, we see raised beds. You can see that they're exposed to air on all sides. This helps them to dry more evenly. And you can also see that we didn't do any depulping in this. This is literally just the coffees are picked and then placed onto beds. Takes about 30 days, and again, we're shooting to get that moisture level down to about 11%, below 12%, because again, bacteria. The dried coffee cherries then get moved to mechanical hulling machines. This is where the pulp is removed, and it's really dry, so it's really just a process of peeling it off. It's not actually all that difficult. And that's when we find the actual bean itself that's going to get shipped to us. Typically, natural processed coffees are more fruity. They have more berry notes in them. They tend to have a more boozy or winey acidity to them, and usually have a heavier or a more syrupy body. Again, that's not indicative of every single natural process. Some are not like that at all. Some are very chocolatey and don't have a huge body to them. But this is kind of the general, broad strokes picture that we paint of these two types of coffees. Both of these undergo fermentation. The wash process goes through a pretty obvious fermentation at the beginning, and over the course of 30 days, the mucilage inside these coffee cherries on a natural process begins to ferment as well, and this introduces sugars into the beans. That's why we want some fermentation no matter what. There's probably not as much fermentation in the natural process as the wash process, but you get the idea. So now we move on to the first of our kind of weirder processes, our new processes, I guess we should say. The first one's going to be anaerobic. Anaerobic obviously means without oxygen. This is from Cordillera de Fuego, which is the farm that it was grown on. This one and the next one are all going to be grown on this farm and processed on this farm. So in an anaerobic process, what happens first is the coffee is depulped, and it gets placed in these metal fermentation tanks. You can see them in the picture here. They're literally just metal tanks that you would see, wouldn't look out of place in a brewery, I guess I would say. The mucilage is then packed into this gel-like consistency, and it's placed into the tanks until the parchment of the coffee beans is completely covered. The parchment is that silver skin that protects the coffee bean itself. Basically what we're doing is we're ensuring that the coffee beans aren't exposed to oxygen at all. The tanks get hermetically sealed. There's usually a one-way valve to allow oxygen to escape, and as fermentation begins, CO2 begins to fill the tank. This creates pressure inside the tank because there's not enough of an escape for the CO2 to actually get out. What this does is it helps to force the juices, the sugars from the mucilage, into the beans, infusing it with a little bit more of that fruity flavor. After 18 to 24 hours, the beans get sun-dried in order to stop the fermentation. So this is actually a much quicker sun-dry phase than the wash process or the natural process. Part of that is because all the mucilage has been taken off and they're not as wet as the wash process. So the other thing that they have to watch out for is after about 15 hours, the pH needs to be really consistent. Otherwise, they can actually ferment this all the way to alcohol. I don't know if it would taste any good. I'm sure someone in Costa Rica would know. But it's a risk that you're taking in such a high fermentation heavy process. So the next one, the last one, is the Cordillera de Fuego Termico process. Termico is Spanish for thermic, which if anybody remembers anything about Latin or anything, sounds like has something to do with heat, and it does. So this was developed by Luis Campos. He owns and runs Cordillera de Fuego, the farm that we're getting these two alternatively processed coffees from. And what this process is actually a variation of what's known as semi-washed processing. So in semi-wash processing, what happens is the cherries are depulped, the skin gets removed, and the beans with the mucilage on them are put out on the drying beds. So it's similar to a natural process in that it doesn't go through those water vats of fermentation, but it removes the pulp, so the mucilage itself isn't as like concentrated on the beans, but that means that there's a little bit more fermentation actually because they kind of share liquid with other beans around them. In the Termico process, though, after they depulp the beans and the mucilage are heated. The point of heating is to break down the mucilage, and it starts to caramelize the natural sugars that are found in that juice. Then they're put out onto drying racks, and with the mucilage still intact, and left to dry until they reach their desired dry phase. The goal of this is to create something that's really sweet. That mucilage breaking down means that sugar can more easily pass into the beans quickly. And so in theory, you're going to wind up with a sweeter cup of coffee than otherwise. You'll also probably wind up with a slightly fruitier cup of coffee. Now, I will say here that the anaerobic process and the Termico process, they've studied them a little bit, but there's not a lot of science out on them. So most of what we see with these things are sort of what we are speculating on. All of what I just said makes total sense, especially given what we already know about fermentation. But there's always that grain of salt with new things. Is it just fancy and fun because it sounds cool, or is it, an actual like new fun thing? I'm inclined to believe it's a new fun thing. So let me know if I'm wrong, because I'm not a chemist. So last thing we wanted to run through is a couple different ways to try these coffees. First off is cupping. So cupping dates back to something like the 1800s. It was a way of tasting coffee at the farm level to make sure the coffee tasted good and that they could send it out and sell it to people all around the world. Nowadays, it's still something that's done at the farm level. It's usually just done by what are known as Q graders. These are people who are certified by the Specialty Coffee Association. And what they do is they taste coffee and they grade it on a scale from 0 to 100. Specialty coffee has to fall within a certain range. Well, not a certain range. It has to be above a certain number. I think it's 75. I could be wrong about that, though. So it has to be above a certain score in order to be considered specialty coffee. All the coffee that we have at Circadian is considered specialty coffee. And we're usually in like the upper 80s range of our score. I don't know that you would taste a huge difference between, a coffee that's scored an 83 versus an 85, but you can probably tell a pretty big difference between a coffee that scores an 80 versus a 95, if that makes sense. It's all about, that range of scale. So in order to cup, we're going to need a couple things. First, we need a bunch of small cups or bowls, spoons, hot water kettle, timers, that's plural. You can do it with one, but it's easier with multiple, and a notepad and a pencil. The important thing about cupping is keeping track of what everything tastes like. You can do this with other styles of trying coffee, but cupping really is a scientific experience, not one that's just kind of passive. These small cups and bowls you can see in the picture on here, right here. These are the industry standard cups that people use. You can buy them online if you want, or you can, just use some small ball jars or something. So our standard ratio, we use 11.5 grams of coffee, ground slightly coarser than what we use for a drip brewed coffee. So drip brewed coffee is usually table salt consistency. You want something that's a little bit coarser than that. So kind of a truer medium, I guess you could say. You put those in the cups, and we pour 185 grams of filtered water just off boil over the coffee grounds. You wait 3 to 5 minutes, and then you're going to do something called breaking the crust. When you pour the water on top of this coffee, it's going to create a crust on the very top of it. It's going to kind of look like the top of a fudgy brownie, something like that. And what you do is you take the back of your spoon and you very gently press down on the coffee. And all of the coffee on top is going to start to sink down to the bottom. You want to make a note of what smell you smell there, the aroma of the coffee. This is going to be one of the biggest aroma experiences of the entire process, because as soon as you break that, it's going to release all of this hot air that's kind of entrapped under the beans. So definitely make a note of that and make sure to smell it. After you break the crust, move on to the next cup, break the crust there, and do the same thing, and make a note of all of the aromas that you're smelling for each one. Finally, you're going to come back to that first one, and you're going to gently scoop the grounds that are still floating on the top of the cup off of the coffee. Best way to do this is with 2 spoons. Take 2 spoons with the back of the spoon pointed at you, and at the front of the cup, you're going to dip it in just ever so slightly, move it to the back of the cup away from you, and then slowly scoop up with the 2 spoons. Okay? It takes a little bit of practice, but your goal is to be really consistent in the way you do it. Okay, so just trying to do the same thing every time. And also, you don't want to agitate the coffee that's settled on the bottom of the cup. Okay, because if you agitate that, then you're going to get coffee grounds in your scoop of coffee when you get there. After you've gotten all the coffee grounds off the top, then you're going to use a clean spoon, scoop up a little bit of coffee from the first one, and slurp the coffee off the spoon. This isn't just a fun thing to do. It is very fun. Anytime someone gives you permission to slurp something, do it. But it also actually helps to, 1, cool the coffee down to a really nice temperature. 2, it helps to spread the coffee across your entire palate so you get a more full flavor experience. And 3, it helps the coffee to, it's called retro olfactory. So what happens is the aromas of the coffee actually move up the back of your throat and back into your nose, so you actually can smell the coffee again retroactively, sort of. And that's what slurping actually does. So it serves a purpose, and it's going to help you taste this coffee more fully. You want to write down any flavors, aromas, anything it might remind you of on a piece of paper, and then move on to the next coffee and do that. And then every 30 seconds at first, try each coffee again. Write down anything that might have changed. And then after you've done, every 30 seconds for, let's say, like 2 minutes, then do it every minute. And just keep doing that until the coffee is something that you don't want to drink anymore. Even after the coffee gets to room temperature, you're going to be able to taste how it's changed over the course of that. And you have a written log to tell you now. If you're not interested in doing a cupping, which I completely understand, it's a lot of work, a lot of mess, you can do something that's called a tasting. This is usually what we do in our shop. So cupping is something I do when I want to find every little nook and cranny of what this coffee tastes like. A tasting is what I do when I want to try to figure out what this coffee is going to taste like to you, the end consumer who is not doing a cupping. This usually means doing a pour over of some kind. We brew coffee every which way to Sunday in our shop. We'll do pour overs, AeroPresses, espresso, French press, mocha pots. We do everything with all of our coffee so we have an idea of what it tastes like no matter which way you want to brew it. So I'm going to run through a pour over and a French press really quickly with you guys. So a pour over is really just a manual way of brewing coffee. You can see in the picture over here, there's this thing that's called a gooseneck kettle. It helps you pour coffee really consistently and evenly in this really small stream. There's a pour-over brewer. In this case, we're looking at a Chemex, but we included in your guys' packaging a one-time use disposable pour-over that you can use in your cup. And then the carafe that it's being poured into. In your guys' case, you're doing it directly into your cup. So what you're going to do is grind the coffee to a consistency of table salt. So this is a fine grind. And you're going to dose out the coffee. So we typically use a 1:16 coffee to water ratio in our shop. For every gram of coffee that you add in, you're going to want to add 16 grams of water. That's just the math that you can do to figure out how much water you need. A typical cup is going to be 250 to 300 grams, just to help you out there. First thing you're going to do after you add the coffee into the filter is you're going to pour roughly twice as much water as there are grinds. So if you started with 16 grams of coffee, you're going to add 32 grams of water. And you're going to saturate the grinds, get everything all nice and wet with those 32 grams of water. If you go a little bit over, it's okay. And you're going to wait for 30 seconds. This is what's known as the bloom. This helps make sure that all of the coffee is well saturated. Any gases that are left in the coffee are going to expel themselves. You'll actually see it kind of puff up and down a little bit. It's kind of fun. And then over the course of 2 to 4 pours, there are a lot of different ways to do pour overs, so I don't like telling people this is the definitive way, especially since a Chemex is different than a V60. But over the course of 2 to 4 pours of water, you're going to add the remaining water onto your pour over. You're going to want to pour really gently. You don't want to disturb the ground beds too much. You don't want to make a bunch of divots on the top, basically. And you want to pour in a circular motion to ensure all of the coffee gets in contact with the water. Now, the single-use option that we sent you guys, we think that it really works best if you do it as a continuous pour. So after you do the 30-second bloom, just pour continuously, really slowly, over all of the grounds until you have the desired amount of water in there. Okay, I think we suggest 240 with the amount of coffee you can fit in the filter. So just do it all in one pour after the bloom. Okay, this is really where a kettle, a gooseneck kettle, comes in handy. It allows you to pour really slowly and really consistently. Finally, there's the French press, which if you're not interested in doing a cupping, the French press is really going to be the next best thing. I don't know how many coffee people would be happy I just said that, but here we are. So a French press is an immersion style brewing of coffee. So the coffee is going to go into the French press. There's going to be water in there, gets all mixed up. You let it sit for 4 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. And then you push the plunger down to get the coffee out of the way. That's all there is to it, which is really similar to cupping. It's not all that different. So what you're going to do is you're going to grind the coffee. It should be roughly the consistency of sea salt in this case, so a lot coarser than our last one. You're going to add coffee to the French press, pour half of the water onto the grounds, stir, and then you're going to pour the rest of the water in. Put the lid on top of the French press, don't push the plunger, wait 4 to 5 minutes, and then really slowly push that plunger down. Stop just before the top of it touches the settled grounds on the bottom. So all those grounds that settled on the bottom, you don't want to kick them back up and create more of a slurry. You want them to stay there. This also means that when you pour out of the French press, you want to pour really slowly to keep those grounds at the bottom of the French press. There's a lot of information about brewing too. The internet is a treasure trove of information about it. I will say really quickly though, if your coffee tastes too bitter, it means that you over-extracted your coffee. It means that you pulled out too many of the delicious aromatic compounds and it's made your coffee bitter. The easiest way to handle this is to grind your coffee coarser. And if your coffee comes out sour, it means you under-extracted your coffee. So that means you didn't pull enough of those aromatic compounds, all that sweetness, out of the beans. And the easiest way to combat this is to grind your coffee finer. In the case of the French press, though, what you can do is you can actually you can change the time. So if your coffee's too bitter, over-extracted, then you can brew it for less time. And if your coffee's too sour and under-extracted, you can brew it for more time. Those are the quick tips we got for you guys. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on social media or on through our website. We'll hit you guys up with any information you might need to brew the best cup of coffee that you can. If you post about us on social media, be sure to tag us at circadiancoffee.com, #circadiancoffee. And we are really excited to hear what you guys think about these 4 different types of processing methods and see if you can taste the difference between them. Seriously, if you get a chance to taste them all at the same time, do it blind. Okay, put a little piece of tape under each cup, write like a letter or something that corresponds to different ones, and then mix them all up. Taste them. See if you can tell which one's which. And yeah, I think that's all I got for you guys. Enjoy. Let us know what you think.